The morning fog rolled across the Afghan mountains like a gray blanket, concealing the movements of coalition forces as they prepared for what intelligence had labeled Operation Silent Thunder. Commander Jake Morrison crouched behind a rocky outcrop, his weathered hands gripping the MRAD sniper rifle that had been his companion through countless missions. The weapon felt heavier than usual, its bolt-action mechanism seized tight from the previous night's firefight. Morrison's team had been tracking a high-value target for 3 weeks through the treacherous terrain of Kunar province. The Taliban commander they hunted was responsible for coordinating attacks that had claimed the lives of dozens of American soldiers. Every lead had brought them closer, and now they had him cornered in a compound nestled between two mountain peaks. The SEAL commander's radio crackled with updates from his spotters positioned on the surrounding ridges. Enemy movement was increasing as dawn approached. Morrison knew they had perhaps 30 minutes before the target would attempt to escape through one of the many cave systems that honeycombed these ancient mountains. He worked frantically with the jammed rifle, his fingers probing the bolt mechanism. Years of experience told him the weapon would not fire in its current condition. Sand and debris from the previous engagement had fouled the action beyond field repair. Morrison cursed under his breath, knowing that his team's primary long-range capability was now useless. "Commander, we've got movement in the compound," whispered Petty Officer Martinez through the comm system. "Target is preparing to move." Morrison scanned the area below through his binoculars. The compound sat approximately 800 meters away, a perfect distance for precision rifle work. But without a functioning weapon, they would have to rely on the rest of his team positioned at closer ranges, increasing the risk of casualties and reducing their chances of a clean elimination. That was when Morrison noticed her. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural in the harsh mountain environment. She had arrived with the forward support element just hours earlier, but Morrison had been too focused on the mission to pay much attention to the additional personnel. Now, watching her navigate the rocky terrain with her own sniper rifle, he realized she might be their solution. Vasquez carried herself with the confident bearing of someone who had seen extensive combat. Her movements were economical and precise, never wasting energy or exposing herself unnecessarily to potential enemy observation. Morrison had worked with enough snipers to recognize exceptional skill when he saw it. "Sergeant Vasquez," Morrison called softly, motioning her toward his position. She approached with quick, silent steps, her rifle held at the ready. Up close, Morrison could see the weathered features of someone who had spent considerable time in hostile environments. Her eyes held the steady focus that marked professional shooters, and her gear showed the careful maintenance of someone who understood that equipment failures could mean death. "Sir," she responded, keeping her voice low. Morrison hefted his jammed rifle, frustration evident in his expression. "Primary weapons down. Bolts seized solid. We need long-range coverage for this target." Vasquez glanced toward the compound, quickly assessing the distance and angles. "I can take the shot, Commander. What's the range?" 800 meters, slight uphill angle. Target's a Taliban commander, high value. Clean elimination required." Without hesitation, Vasquez began setting up her shooting position. Morrison watched as she arranged her gear with practiced efficiency, noting the small details that marked an experienced operator. Her rifle was immaculately maintained, the scope carefully adjusted, and her shooting mat positioned to minimize profile while maximizing stability. "Sergeant," Morrison said, still holding his useless rifle, "I need to know you can make this shot count. We won't get a second chance." Vasquez paused in her preparations, meeting his gaze directly. "Commander, I understand the stakes." Morrison studied her face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or hesitation. What he saw instead was calm confidence backed by something harder to define. There was a depth to her expression that spoke of extensive combat experience, of difficult decisions made under pressure. "How much long-range work have you done?" Morrison asked. "Enough," Vasquez replied simply, returning to her rifle setup. The response bothered Morrison. He was accustomed to detailed briefings, statistics, and confidence backed by verifiable experience. But time was running short, and his options were limited. Either trust this unknown sniper or risk a closer approach with his assault team. Morrison's radio crackled again. Commander, target is moving toward the vehicle. We've got maybe 10 minutes before he's mobile. Decision made, Morrison prepared to hand over the mission's most critical task to someone he knew nothing about. But first, he needed to test her resolve in a way that would tell him everything he needed to know about Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez. Morrison hefted his jammed MRAD rifle, its weight familiar despite its current uselessness. Then, without warning, he hurled the weapon toward Vasquez with enough force that catching it would require quick reflexes and strong hands. The rifle spun through the air, its metal surfaces catching the early morning light. Any normal soldier might have flinched or stepped aside to avoid the heavy, awkward projectile. Instead, Vasquez moved with fluid precision, her hands coming up to catch the weapon cleanly despite its awkward trajectory. What happened next would change Morrison's understanding of the woman crouched beside him. As Vasquez caught the rifle, something small and metallic fell from her uniform pocket. The object hit the rocky ground with a distinct metallic ring that seemed unnaturally loud in the mountain silence. Morrison looked down to see what appeared to be a military challenge coin, but as his eyes focused on the details, his breath caught in his throat. The coin was unlike anything Morrison had seen in his 15 years of military service. Its surface bore intricate engravings that spoke of accomplishments far beyond standard military decorations. Around the edge, small marks were etched in precise rows, each mark representing something significant enough to be permanently recorded. Morrison picked up the coin, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he examined its surface. The weight felt substantial, speaking to quality craftsmanship and serious purpose. But it was the numbers etched into the metal that made his pulse quicken. 87 distinct marks surrounded the coin's perimeter, each one carefully carved into the metal. Morrison had seen similar tokens before, though rarely. They were unofficial awards created by units to recognize achievements that could never be publicly acknowledged. The marks on this particular coin could only mean one thing: 87 confirmed eliminations. Morrison's eyes moved from the coin to Vasquez, who was watching him with the same calm expression she had maintained since their conversation began. She made no move to reclaim the token, showing no embarrassment or false modesty about what it represented. 87, Morrison said quietly, the number feeling strange in his mouth. Confirmed, Vasquez replied simply. The word hung in the morning air between them. Morrison found himself reassessing everything he had observed about this woman. Her fluid movements, her confident bearing, her immediate willingness to take on the most critical shot of the operation. Suddenly, it all made perfect sense. 87 confirmed eliminations represented years of combat operations, dozens of missions, and a level of skill that placed Vasquez among the most effective snipers in military history. Morrison realized he was looking at someone whose reputation should have preceded her, someone whose presence on his operation was either an incredible stroke of luck or the result of careful planning by higher command. "Why didn't anyone tell me who you were?" Morrison asked. Vasquez shrugged slightly, her attention already shifting back toward the target compound. "Orders are to provide support where needed, Commander. Names and numbers don't make the bullets fly straighter." Morrison understood the philosophy behind her words. In special operations, egos and reputations could interfere with mission success. What mattered was capability and results, not past accomplishments. Still, knowing he had one of the military's most experienced snipers at his disposal changed his tactical calculations significantly. His radio crackled with an urgent update. "Commander, target is at the vehicle. Looks like he's preparing to depart." Morrison handed the challenge coin back to Vasquez, who pocketed it without ceremony. The brief exchange had told him everything he needed to know about her capabilities and professionalism. Now it was time to see those skills in action. "Sergeant, the target is yours. Take him down." Vasquez nodded once, then settled into her shooting position with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Morrison watched as she adjusted her scope, calculated wind and elevation, and prepared to add another mark to her impressive tally. The morning mist was beginning to lift, providing clearer visibility toward the compound. Morrison could see figures moving near the building, loading equipment into vehicles. Through his binoculars, he identified the primary target, a bearded man in traditional Afghan clothing who matched the intelligence photographs perfectly. Vasquez made final adjustments to her rifle, her breathing becoming slow and controlled. Morrison observed her preparation with professional interest, noting techniques he had not seen before. Her approach to the shot seemed almost methodical, as if she was following a mental checklist developed through extensive experience. Target acquired, Vasquez whispered into her radio. Morrison felt the familiar tension that preceded critical shots. Success would eliminate a significant threat and advance their mission objectives. Failure would alert the compound to their presence and likely result in the target's escape through the mountain cave system. The mountain silence stretched between them as Vasquez prepared to take what would become her 88th confirmed elimination. Morrison found himself holding his breath, despite having witnessed countless sniper engagements throughout his career. Something about this moment felt different, charged with significance beyond the tactical importance of eliminating a single target. Vasquez's finger moved to the trigger, her body perfectly still, except for the slow, controlled rhythm of her breathing. Morrison watched through his binoculars as the target moved into the optimal position, unaware that his life was about to end from a ridge nearly a kilometer away. The shot, when it came, would mark the beginning of a partnership that would reshape both Morrison's understanding of precision warfare and Vasquez's role in the broader conflict. Neither of them could have predicted how this moment would alter the trajectory of their respective careers, or how the challenge coin that had revealed Vasquez's deadly expertise would become a symbol of the trust between two warriors who had found each other in the mountains of Afghanistan. But all of that lay ahead of them. For now, there was only the target, the rifle, and the professional silence that surrounded Vasquez as she prepared to add another mark to her already impressive record. The rifle's report echoed across the Afghan valley like thunder, the sound bouncing off rocky walls and rolling through the mountain passes long after the bullet had found its target. Commander Morrison watched through his binoculars as the Taliban leader crumpled beside the vehicle, the precision of Vasquez's shot eliminating any doubt about the outcome. "Target down," Morrison reported into his radio, his voice carrying a note of professional admiration. Vasquez worked the bolt of her rifle smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round in case follow-up shots were needed. Her movements remained controlled and economical, showing none of the excitement or relief that often followed successful long-range engagements. She simply continued scanning the compound through her scope, maintaining overwatch, while Morrison's assault team prepared to move in for confirmation and intelligence gathering. "Clean shot, Sergeant," Morrison said, lowering his binoculars. "Center mass at 800 meters with that wind." Vasquez nodded acknowledgement, but kept her attention focused downrange. "Still have movement in the compound, Commander. 3 additional targets armed, taking defensive positions." Morrison switched his radio to the assault team frequency. "Phoenix 1, this is Overwatch. Primary target is down, but you've got 3 hostiles setting up defensive positions. Proceed with caution." The response came immediately from Staff Sergeant Williams, leading the assault element. "Copy, Overwatch. We have visual on the compound. Moving to secure." Morrison settled in beside Vasquez to provide spotting support as his team began their approach. This phase of the operation required careful coordination between the ground element and their sniper Overwatch. Any mistake could result in friendly fire or missed threats that might endanger the assault team. "Movement, second floor window," Vasquez reported calmly. "Armed male, approximately 30 years old, AK-47. Morrison tracked to the location with his binoculars, confirming the threat. "Phoenix 1, hostile on second floor, east side window. Sniper has eyes on. Copy, Overwatch. We see him." Vasquez adjusted her aim slightly, maintaining target acquisition on the figure in the window. Morrison could see the careful calculations she was making, accounting for the different range and angle compared to her previous shot. Her breathing remained steady, finger ready on the trigger if the situation demanded immediate action. "He's moving away from the window," Morrison reported. Lost visual. The assault team reached the compound perimeter, using practice tactics to clear the outer buildings. Morrison and Vasquez provided continuous overwatch, their elevated position offering clear sightlines into areas the ground team could not observe directly. As the operation progressed, Morrison found himself studying Vasquez's technique with professional interest. Her approach to sniper work differed from what he had observed in other operators. Where many snipers showed visible tension during extended engagements, Vasquez seemed to enter a state of relaxed focus that allowed her to maintain precision over long periods. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Morrison asked during a brief lull in radio traffic. "Started hunting with my grandfather when I was 8, Vasquez replied without taking her eye from the scope. "Deer hunting in Montana. He was particular about clean shots." Morrison nodded, understanding how civilian hunting experience often translated into military marksmanship. Many of the best military snipers had learned their fundamental skills pursuing game rather than enemies. But the transition from hunting animals to eliminating human targets required psychological adjustments that not everyone could make. "When did you transition to military work?" Morrison continued. "Enlisted at 18, right after high school. Infantry first, then sniper school, then special operations. Been doing precision work for about 12 years now." The timeline matched Morrison's assessment of her apparent age and experience level. 12 years of active sniper operations would account for the 87 confirmed eliminations represented by her challenge coin, though Morrison suspected the actual number might be higher. Military record-keeping often missed targets eliminated in classified operations or situations where confirmation was impossible. "Phoenix 1 to Overwatch," Williams' voice crackled through the radio. "Compound is secure. Primary target confirmed KIA. We have intelligence materials and 2 prisoners." Morrison felt the satisfaction of a successful mission. The Taliban commander had been eliminated, potentially disrupting enemy operations throughout the region. Intelligence materials recovered from the compound might lead to additional targets or provide insight into planned attacks against coalition forces. Outstanding work, Phoenix 1. Prepare for extraction. As the assault team secured the compound and prepared captured materials for transport, Morrison and Vasquez began breaking down their Overwatch position. The mission was complete, but Morrison found himself reluctant to end his conversation with this remarkable sniper. "Sergeant, I have to ask about that challenge coin," Morrison said as they packed their gear. 87 confirmed eliminations is an extraordinary record. Why haven't I heard of you before?" Vasquez paused in her equipment checks, considering how much to reveal about her background. "Most of my work has been with compartmented operations, Commander. Task Force 373 mostly. We don't generate much publicity." Morrison understood immediately. Task Force 373 was a classified special operations unit tasked with high-value target elimination and reconnaissance missions throughout Afghanistan and Pakistan. Their operations were rarely acknowledged publicly, and their personnel often worked under cover identities or temporary assignments with other units. The revelation explained several things about Vasquez that had puzzled Morrison. Her immediate availability for his operation, her reluctance to discuss her background, and her extraordinary skill level all made sense in the context of classified special operations work. "How long have you been with 373? Morrison asked. 4 years active, 2 years reserve status. This assignment is part of my transition back to conventional special operations," Vasquez explained. Morrison realized he was witnessing something significant. Task Force 373 personnel were among the most experienced and capable operators in the military. Their transition to conventional special operations often marked a shift in the military strategy or mission requirements. Having Vasquez available for his operation represented an unusual opportunity. "What's your assessment of working with conventional SEAL teams?" Morrison asked. Vasquez shouldered her rifle and looked toward the compound where Morrison's team was completing their work. "Different mission parameters, different rules of engagement, but good operators adapt to whatever the situation requires." The diplomatic response told Morrison that Vasquez understood the political sensitivities surrounding special operations integration. Task Force 373 worked under authorities and rules that conventional special operations teams did not have access to. Transitioning between those environments required careful navigation of legal and procedural differences. Morrison's radio interrupted their conversation. "Overwatch, this is Phoenix 1. Ready for extraction to primary LZ. Morrison acknowledged and began coordinating helicopter support for their departure. The mission had achieved all primary objectives, and remaining in the area longer than necessary would increase their risk of enemy contact. As they moved toward the landing zone, Morrison found himself formulating a plan that would keep Vasquez attached to his unit for future operations. Having access to someone with her capabilities and experience could dramatically improve his team's effectiveness in precision targeting missions. "Sergeant, I'm going to speak with my command about extending your temporary assignment," Morrison said as they walked. Vasquez looked at him with interest but did not respond immediately. Morrison suspected she was evaluating whether conventional SEAL operations would provide the professional challenges she was accustomed to. "What kind of missions are you planning?" Vasquez asked. Morrison considered how much operational information he could share. "We have several high-value targets in this area of operations. Your skill set would be valuable for precision elimination missions. Similar to today's operation?" "Some similar, some more complex. Longer range shots, urban environments, time-sensitive situations, the kind of work that requires someone with your experience level." Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. Morrison could see her weighing the benefits of continuing to work with his team against whatever alternatives might be available through her Task Force 373 connections. The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted their discussion, the distinctive rhythm of rotor blades echoing off the mountain walls. Morrison's team had called for extraction using standard procedures, but the approaching aircraft sounded different from the usual transport helicopters. "Those aren't our birds," Morrison said, raising his binoculars toward the sound. Vasquez was already scanning the sky through her rifle scope, using the magnification to identify the incoming aircraft. "Two helicopters, military configuration. They're not broadcasting friendly identification codes." Morrison felt the familiar tension of a situation changing rapidly. The mission had been successful, but they were now potentially facing an unknown threat during what should have been a routine extraction. "Phoenix 1, this is Overwatch. We have unidentified aircraft approaching from the northwest. Take defensive positions and prepare for possible hostile contact." Williams responded immediately. "Copy, Overwatch. We have concealment in the compound buildings." Morrison and Vasquez moved to a position with better cover and observation angles. If the approaching helicopters were hostile, their elevated position might provide crucial intelligence about enemy strength and intentions. Through his binoculars, Morrison could make out details of the aircraft as they approached. The helicopters appeared to be Soviet-era Mi-17s, commonly used by various forces throughout the region. Without clear identification markings visible at this distance, determining whether they represented friendly or hostile forces was impossible. "Can you get a clear look at those birds?" Morrison asked Vasquez. She had already adjusted her scope for the longer range required to observe the aircraft clearly. "Mi-17 helicopters, armed configuration. I can see door gunners and what appears to be external weapon systems." Morrison felt his tactical situation assessment shifting rapidly. If these were hostile aircraft, his team was potentially facing a significant threat with limited defensive options. Their position offered concealment from ground forces, but provided little protection against aerial attack. "Phoenix 1. Enemy helicopters approaching. Armed configuration with visible door gunners. Recommend immediate dispersion and concealment." The response from Williams carried new urgency. "Copy, Overwatch. We're moving to dispersed positions. Can you provide updates on their approach vector?" Morrison watched as the helicopters continued toward their location, their flight path suggesting they were specifically targeting the compound area. Whether they were responding to reports of the morning's engagement or conducting a planned operation was unclear, but their intentions seemed increasingly hostile. "Sergeant," Morrison said to Vasquez, "if those birds are carrying reinforcements for the compound, we're going to need to discourage them from landing." Vasquez studied the approaching aircraft through her scope, calculating ranges and angles. "Helicopters make challenging targets at this distance, Commander. But if they attempt to land troops, I might be able to discourage them." Morrison understood the tactical implications. Engaging helicopters with small arms fire was generally ineffective unless the shots were placed with extraordinary precision. But Vasquez's demonstrated capabilities suggested she might be able to achieve results that conventional small arms fire could not. The morning's successful mission was about to become something much more complicated, and Morrison found himself grateful that fate had placed one of the military's most skilled snipers at his side when the situation began to deteriorate. The two Mi-17 helicopters descended toward the compound with military precision, their rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust and debris that obscured the landing area. Commander Morrison watched through his binoculars as figures prepared to fast rope from the aircraft, their movements suggesting well-trained military personnel rather than irregular fighters. Phoenix 1, you have approximately 20 hostiles preparing to deploy from those birds, Morrison reported into his radio. Recommend immediate egress from the compound. Staff Sergeant Williams' response carried the strain of a rapidly deteriorating tactical situation. Negative, Overwatch. We're pinned down by automatic weapons fire from the tree line. Cannot move from current positions. Morrison cursed under his breath. Realizing his team was caught between enemy forces deploying from the helicopters and additional hostiles who had apparently been positioned as a reaction force. The successful elimination of the Taliban commander had been part of a larger trap designed to ambush coalition forces. Sergeant Vasquez, Morrison said urgently, we need to even these odds quickly, or Phoenix 1 is going to be overrun. Vasquez had been tracking the lead helicopter through her rifle scope, waiting for an opportunity to engage effectively. Commander, if I can disable the lead bird before they complete deployment, it might scatter their attack formation. Morrison understood the tactical logic. Helicopters were vulnerable during landing operations, when their pilots were focused on the ground rather than potential threats. A well-placed shot might disable the aircraft or force it to abort its landing, disrupting the coordinated attack. What do you need from me? Morrison asked. Spotting and wind calls. These shots are going to be at the extreme edge of effective range. Morrison adjusted his position to provide better observation angles, while Vasquez prepared for what would be one of the most challenging shots of her career. Engaging a moving helicopter at extended range required calculations that went far beyond normal sniper work. The lead helicopter settled into a hover approximately 20 meters above the compound, its side doors open and ropes deployed. Morrison could see figures beginning their descent, moving with the practiced efficiency of special operations personnel. Range 1,200 meters, Morrison called. Wind from the northwest at approximately 10 knots. Vasquez made rapid adjustments to her scope, accounting for the increased distance and environmental factors. Morrison watched as she settled into her shooting position, her breathing becoming slow and controlled despite the urgency of their situation. Target the engine compartment, Morrison advised. Disrupting power will force them down immediately. Vasquez nodded, tracking the helicopter through her scope as it maintained its hover. The aircraft presented a relatively stable target, but the range and size of the critical components made precision essential. The rifle's report echoed across the valley as Vasquez fired her first shot at the hovering aircraft. Morrison watched through his binoculars as sparks flew from the helicopter's engine housing, indicating a successful hit. The aircraft immediately began exhibiting signs of mechanical distress, its hover becoming unstable. Hit, Morrison called. Engine damage visible. They're having control problems. The helicopter pilot attempted to maintain his position long enough for the remaining troops to complete their insertion, but the engine damage was forcing the aircraft toward an emergency landing. Morrison could see figures still on the ropes, caught in a dangerous situation as their transport struggled to remain airborne. Second bird is moving to cover the landing, Morrison reported, as the trailing helicopter adjusted its approach vector. Vasquez was already tracking the new target, working her rifle's bolt to chamber a fresh round. The second helicopter was approaching from a different angle, making the engagement more complex. Its pilot had observed the damage to the lead aircraft and was taking evasive action. Range 1,400 meters and increasing, Morrison called as the helicopter maneuvered. They're staying mobile. Vasquez waited for the aircraft to stabilize in its flight pattern before taking her shot. The increased range and moving target made this an extremely difficult engagement, requiring precise timing and exceptional marksmanship. Her second shot struck the helicopter's tail rotor assembly, causing immediate and catastrophic damage to the aircraft's flight controls. Morrison watched as the helicopter began spinning uncontrollably, its pilot fighting to maintain some semblance of controlled flight. Tail rotor hit, Morrison shouted over his radio. Second bird is going down. The damaged helicopter managed a hard landing approximately 500 meters from the compound, its crew and passengers surviving the impact, but clearly out of the immediate fight. Morrison could see figures emerging from the wreckage, but they appeared more concerned with survival than continuing their assault. Phoenix 1, both aircraft are down, Morrison reported. How's your situation? Williams's response carried relief and renewed confidence. Much better, Overwatch. The tree line shooters are pulling back. We can move to the extraction point. Morrison felt the familiar satisfaction of a tactical situation shifting in their favor. Vasquez's precise shooting had eliminated the aerial threat and disrupted the enemy's coordinated attack. Her 87 confirmed eliminations had just become 89, with two of the most challenging shots of her career. Outstanding shooting, Sergeant, Morrison said as they began moving toward the extraction point. Those were extraordinary shots under combat conditions. Vasquez acknowledged the praise with a simple nod, her attention already shifting to their movement route and potential threats. Morrison admired her professional focus and reluctance to dwell on successful engagements while tactical situations remained fluid. As they moved down the mountainside, Morrison's radio crackled with an incoming transmission from higher command. Overwatch 6, this is Falcon Base. We have extraction assets inbound to your location. ETA 15 minutes. Morrison acknowledged the transmission, coordinating final details for their departure from the operational area. The mission had evolved far beyond its original parameters, but all primary objectives had been achieved with minimal friendly casualties. Sergeant, Morrison said as they reached the extraction landing zone, I want to formally request that you be permanently assigned to my team. Today's performance demonstrates capabilities we need for future operations. Vasquez considered the proposal as they established security around the landing zone. Morrison could see her weighing the benefits of conventional special operations work against the high-level missions she was accustomed to through Task Force 373. What kind of operational tempo are you planning, Commander? Vasquez asked. Morrison understood that operational tempo was a critical factor for experienced special operations personnel. Too many missions could lead to burnout, while too few might not provide sufficient professional challenge. We have authorization for 12 major operations over the next 6 months, Morrison explained. High-value targets, precision missions, working with intelligence assets, the kind of work that requires your skill level. Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. Morrison suspected she was also considering the political advantages of transitioning to conventional special operations. Task Force 373 operated in a legal gray area that might become problematic as military operations evolved. The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted their discussion. This time, the familiar rhythm of American aircraft coming to extract Morrison's team. The operation was officially ending, but Morrison hoped it marked the beginning of a longer partnership with Vasquez. Commander, Vasquez said as the helicopters approached, I accept your offer, with one condition. Morrison waited for her to continue, curious about what conditions someone with her background might require. I want operational flexibility to decline missions that don't meet professional standards, Vasquez explained. I'm not interested in routine assignments or political operations. Morrison understood immediately. Vasquez was accustomed to high-stakes missions where her specialized skills were essential. Routine special operations work might feel like a step backward in her professional development. Agreed, Morrison said without hesitation. You'll only work missions where your capabilities are genuinely needed. As the extraction helicopters landed and Morrison's team prepared to depart, he reflected on the morning's events. What had begun as a routine high-value target elimination had evolved into something much more significant. He had gained a team member whose skills could dramatically improve their operational effectiveness. Vasquez secured her gear and prepared for helicopter transport, her movements showing the practiced efficiency of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar operations. Morrison watched as she checked her rifle one final time before boarding, noting the care she took with equipment that had just performed flawlessly under extreme conditions. Phoenix 1. Load up! Morrison called to his assault team as they approached the aircraft. As the helicopters lifted off from the Afghan mountainside, Morrison found himself looking forward to future operations with renewed optimism. The addition of Vasquez to his team represented a significant enhancement to their capabilities, but more than that, he had gained respect for a professional whose dedication to excellence matched his own. Through the aircraft window, Morrison could see the compound where they had eliminated the Taliban commander, now empty, except for the vehicles and equipment left behind by the failed rescue attempt. The mission had achieved all its objectives and demonstrated that sometimes the most important outcomes resulted from unexpected partnerships formed under combat conditions. Vasquez sat across from Morrison in the helicopter, her rifle secured between her knees and her challenge coin, visible where it had shifted partially out of her pocket. 89 marks now surrounded its perimeter, representing a career of service that few military personnel could match. Morrison realized that discovering Vasquez's capabilities had been as significant as eliminating their primary target. The jammed rifle that had forced him to rely on an unknown sniper had led to one of the most important tactical partnerships of his career. As the helicopters flew toward their base, Morrison began planning future operations that would make full use of Vasquez's extraordinary skills. The war in Afghanistan continued, but his team now possessed capabilities that could make a meaningful difference in the battles ahead. The morning sun climbed higher over the Afghan mountains, illuminating a landscape where two professional warriors had forged a partnership that would reshape their approach to the challenges of modern warfare. Morrison's decision to throw his jammed rifle to an unknown sniper had revealed not just her exceptional reflexes, but a depth of experience and capability that would prove invaluable in the missions to come. The challenge coin, bearing 89 marks, had become more than just a record of professional achievement. It represented the trust between operators who understood that success in special operations required not just individual excellence, but the ability to work seamlessly with others who shared the same commitment to mission accomplishment and professional standards. As their helicopters disappeared into the vast Afghan sky, Morrison and Vasquez carried with them the satisfaction of a successful mission and the anticipation of future operations where their combined capabilities would be tested against increasingly complex challenges.